Hello, my friends. Jerry Rosa here in the Rosa String Works Workshop. Yes, we're early by a day on this shop talk. That's because I'll be leaving in the morning, heading out to Dayton, Ohio area to visit my grandsons. So I wanted to have the shop talk and catch up on some of the comments from last week. Plus, I think we've got a good topic for this morning, and I think you'll find it interesting. And we've got some other miscellaneous things to talk about as well. Don't see anybody popping up yet, I don't think. Maybe, was that Gordon Bartlett? Did he pop up there, or was that from last time? Yep, I think he is the first one. Michael Boyle's there. Clarence Hatfield. Good. So we are alive, and well, now it says 29 viewers, just like that. So, you go from 0 to 29, just that fast. But thank you for joining me this morning. I just did a rough internet speed test on my Starlink internet, that's what I'm using. And going on the download, it was at 70 this morning, and on the upload, it was at 11. So that's pretty good for here, and so hopefully it'll not buffer too badly. Though I do think my PC is part of the buffering problem. I've got it set as optimal as I can, and I'm really toying with the idea of building a much better PC. But that's going to be really expensive to build the one I want to build. So I don't know if that's worth it or not. The first thing I want to do is clear the air on that video that I posted yesterday on repairing that classical guitar. 75% of the comments were very good, very positive. 25% were pretty negative. And I just wanted to address a few things. Now, I realize the people watching here today, this morning especially, are not the ones that were negative. I realize that, so please don't feel like I'm talking to you directly. But I just wanted to point out a few things because I do think you guys could find what I'm about to say helpful in understanding where I'm coming from on a bunch of videos, really. First of all, the first complaint, of course, was too much complaining. And, I have to give you that. I think I did complain a little bit much, and probably some of that could have been cut out. We didn't cut it out, but that's okay. I decided to go ahead and let it go live. But on the other side of that coin, what some people call complaining is basically stating the black and white obvious, and many of the viewers state these things on my other videos a lot of times. Like, for instance, that's a cheap instrument. Why are you wasting your time on that? Why are, you're worth more than that. Why are you fixing that? Throw that in the dumpster. I get those comments all the time, on lots of them, where the customer is paying me to fix it because it's a sentimental fix or whatever. To me, if it's a sentimental fix, it doesn't matter how cheap it is, I'll fix it, If they want to pay to fix it, I'll fix it. In this case, unsolicited means unsolicited. I didn't know it was coming. I don't typically work on classicals, so there's 2 strikes. And the third strike is it was a very cheap instrument. And, I can't help that. It just was a cheap instrument. You could call that a complaint if you want. I'm just stating the obvious because my viewers state it all the time. And I just figured I would state the obvious so I didn't have to hear that in the complaints. Of course, then they complain about my complaints. So the other thing, now this is more of a physical handicap. The too much sighing, I typically cut that out of the videos I edit myself. I'm a mouth breather. You can hear me. I do not breathe through my nose almost ever. Almost never do I breathe through my nose. It's always through my mouth. And I don't have an option. I was born that way. It just doesn't work. I was hooked on nose sprays for many years. And I quit doing that. I'm still on a steroidal type nose spray, and I'm on allergy medicine to open it up. And 10% of the time, I would say, I can breathe through my nose. 10% of the time. The rest of the time, it's through the mouth. And where that gets really aggravating is at night because it dries your throat out. And you wake up with that real dry throat because I can't breathe through my nose. And all my life, and this is just a fact, I'm just explaining it to you. I'm not complaining, so don't get on me. I'm just explaining that all my life, people just out of the blue say, "What are you mad about?" I go, "I'm not mad." "Well, why are you sighing?" "I'm not sighing, I'm breathing." That's just the way it is. I can't breathe through my nose. And then, God has blessed me with these gigantic lungs. My lungs are way bigger than average. Evidence of that is I can walk up the steepest mountain, at like an 8,000 elevation, and I don't have any problem at all. Zero. I don't get out of breath. I don't feel the altitude like other people do. Evidence of that was we were out in Yellowstone. We were in that highest part of that. I think it was 8,000 feet elevation, and it was 600 vertical feet down to these waterfalls. I walked down, I think the back and forth trails are like 2 miles. I walked the 2 miles down to the waterfalls and then walked the 2 miles back up 600 vertical feet. And only thing that bothered me was the sweating. My lungs are gigantic. So coupled with the gigantic lungs of breathing and then breathing through your mouth, you hear the sighs. And I just wanted to point that out because it's a physical thing. I can't help that. But I do try to cut that out of the short videos that I edit for myself. I always try to cut out the sighs, and there's a lot of sighs. So there you go. The next complaint on that video was that I should have fixed it with the same care. It was not as good a repair. Well, I don't know which video you're watching, but I did fix it with the same care. It's the same repair. The only difference was I was doing it as quickly as I could because I was doing it for free. I couldn't in good conscience charge that lady anything for fixing that, because if I would have charged her, it would have been at least $500 because I'm sure I had at least 5 hours in that. I charge $100 an hour, and if you're waiting for the repair and you stay here while I'm fixing it, and in other words, that puts you in the front of the line, then I charge $125 an hour. But otherwise, it's $100 an hour, and I'm sure I spent at least 5 hours fixing that. Now, the difference was, I fixed it as quickly as I could fix it, and I did the same exact thing I would do if I was taking all the time in the world, but I was just trying to, do it as quick as I could because I had other people waiting, paying customers waiting, So anyway, that's the only difference. That guitar, the neck on that is the only part on that guitar that will never break again. I guarantee you that. That neck is permanent and it's fixed and it was easy to play. So I feel 100% confident and I feel 100% good about the repair. So it's not an issue like that. The other complaint was, you agreed to fix it, so just do it and quit complaining. Like I said, I didn't agree to anything. I didn't even know it was coming. So and then I thought the funniest comment was, "You have such a bad attitude. I'm not watching any more of your videos." And I replied to that comment and I said, "Yeah, you're right. Your attitude's way better than mine." Pot calling the kettle black right there. Anyway, here's a video I took just this morning on the way to the shop. Thought I'd just show you what the morning looks like here on the farm. It's just past daylight, and you can see the fog all across the valley there. It's always much colder down in this valley. We've already had like 3 days below 40, so in the 30s. I was watching a channel last night, Laid Back Living, from Idaho, and they said they only had 1 day in the 30s so far. And they're up in the mountains, so that'll give you some idea. For some reason, this is a little refrigerator area. I don't know if you could hear that at the very end of that video. If you heard that, that is a giant blue heron that lives around this creek all the time. And I have to tell you two funny stories. You can see how quiet and peaceful that is. Well, trust me, when you get up in the woods and like you're sitting on a deer stand or whatever, and like I'm talking about with a bow and arrow, so everything's just quiet, peaceful. You're just sitting there and relaxing and enjoying it, and you're starting to hear a bird or two starting to make a little noise. It's just becoming daylight. Two different times, believe it or not, in two different tree stands. I'm sitting there just absolutely almost ready to fall asleep because it's so peaceful and quiet and you just enjoy the heck out of it. And you're just sitting there relaxing and you hear this thing go, yeah, just scream at the top of its lungs. And it's right above me. They come gliding in, and two different times that's happened. Just about scares the bejesus out of you. I'm seriously telling you. Oh my gosh, it is so loud. That was a half a mile down the valley that you could hear that in. And if it's right above your head, like 20 feet above your head gliding in, oh my gosh, it'll scare you to death. Anyway, that's just a side note and story. That didn't cost you any extra. I have before we get into the meat of the thing, I'll show you a few metal detector finds from yesterday. Now, I spent several hours to find almost nothing. I found a modern quarter, which doesn't really matter. I found a modern dime, which doesn't really matter. You notice how tarnished that dime is. Pay attention to how much tarnish is on that, and I'll show you the old dime here in just a minute. And then this popped out of one of the holes I was digging, and I'm not 100% sure on this one, but I'm about 90% sure that this is an artifact, an ancient Indian artifact, native artifact. It just looks too worked on, especially on the edges. There's a lot of working here. Anyway, I'm pretty sure that's a Native American artifact. Not 100% sure though. So I spent several hours, and that's all I found. I mean, I found lots of trash, but nothing any good. And I'm still getting used to that new little coil. Well, then I relaxed for an hour or so there, and then ate dinner, and then I went back out just before dark, and so I had about 30 minutes or so. Well, in that 30 minutes, I found stuff a lot better than that, even though this is not great. It's nothing to write home about, but it's still pretty nice. Here's a silver dime from 1949. So, you notice that there's no tarnish on that. 1949. Probably been in the ground, I don't know, probably at least 50 years, if not longer, and no tarnish on it at all, as opposed to the modern money. Now, here is a tarnished penny. This is from 1944. But you can see it's not cleaned up perfectly, but the edges are still perfect, where the modern pennies, they're just rotted away. But this is for 1944. Then here's the best one for me. This is a mercury head dime from 1939. Try not to let it glare too much. Again, it's silver. I think they're 90% silver, and the backs on these are really nice too. Again, there's too much glare, and that little camera doesn't focus all that well. So anyway, and then finally I found a 1937 penny also. And again, I got it upside down to you, but anyway, so nothing to write home about, but some decent stuff. And I found that in like 30 minutes, and I'm getting used to that little tiny coil. And that little coil is definitely what you need here. I'm not exaggerating when I tell you, you just move it that far, even with the tiny coil, and you'll hit something. You can't even find a place where there's no trash. I mean, you just can't find a place on this farm. It's just full of stuff. A lot of it's nails, a lot of it's bottle tops and, pull tabs and junk like that. But anyway, it's interesting, and I'm still looking for the gold coin. We're up to 93 viewers. Okay, the status of the silver tone mandolin. Well, I did work on it yesterday, right after I got done with my vlog. And anyway, it's looking good. This part's still not on there, but I got the neck on there very solid. I'm really sure the neck will never be a problem again. And, again, some people really hate the fact that I cut these tangs off. Stop and think about it, and you make your own mind up of which way you like it. Okay, you can see there that the only damage that causes is there's that little tiny mark right there. That's it. That's the only damage it causes. You see that little tiny mark. And you might say, well, you cut the fretboard in half, so that's the damage. Well, you can't tell that, and it won't affect anything, the fact that you cut that apart. So the only damage that you can see with your eye is that. Now, had I not done that, it would have taken me a minimum of an hour to take that fretboard off. There's $100 right there. Probably 2 hours especially on a guitar. So there's $200. And, the fact is, this instrument probably isn't really worth more than $200. I doubt it's worth that, honestly. It might be, to a collector or somebody who really likes silver-tone mandolins. But honestly, they're not worth a lot of money. So would you rather pay $100 or see that little tiny line? That's just really what it boils down to. Saves the customer all kinds of money, especially on an inexpensive instrument. Now, do I do that on a Martin or a Lloyd Loar? No, I don't do that. On a high-end instrument, I'm not going to do that. But then you're going to have to pay. And then the unspoken part of that is, cutting that off, yeah, you got that little scar. But had I taken this off, you got a scar all the way down here, all the way on both sides. And you can't hardly disguise that. Like I told you, there is no zipper. You're not opening these things up without an impact. Now this one, the finish is completely wore off. The impact would have been less on this one, I'll admit. But on ones that have a nice finish down through there, where the finish and the binding overlap, you're breaking that finish all the way. So it's just like shattering glass the whole way. It's just little shatters all the way down, and there's nothing you can do about that. There is, like I said, no zipper to make a clean line. It doesn't make a clean line with that old brittle finish that's on there. And typically when you're resetting the neck, it's on an older instrument. It's not usually on a brand new instrument. On a brand new instrument, you could probably cut it off a little cleaner because the finish hasn't gotten hard and brittle. So these are just points I'm trying to make so that people understand why I do what I do. I make the decision that makes the most sense for that instrument at that time. And especially if I understand what the customer is after. Like if the customer says, look, I don't care how much it costs. I want it done as perfect as you can do it. Well then, all right, I'll do it as perfect as I can do it. I wouldn't cut it off there. But rarely do people say that, especially when they bring you an instrument like this. They generally their, pocketbook's pretty close to them, and they don't want to spend a lot of money, generally speaking. But anyway, this one's turning out great. It's going to be absolutely perfect when it's done. Okay. My main topic today said handling customers' requests. Now, there's, I would say, 3 common requests that I get all the time. And there might be more. I didn't give this a ton of thought. But there's 3 that just popped into my head immediately. The first one is, and it's probably the most common, is I want you to replace all the frets on this. And, let me back up the truck and say it's kind of like taking your instrument to me or to what I would refer to as a qualified luthier is like you going to your doctor and you walk in and you say, doctor, I need a heart transplant. And you're serious. You say, I need a heart transplant. And your doctor looks at you and goes, what makes you think you need a heart transplant? And you say, well, I've been sweating a lot and I got this pain in my arm and, I'm out of breath. You give them the symptoms and you say, I need a heart transplant. Well, that's kind of like, I'm being a little facetious, you understand. But on the other hand, it's a valid point. People come to me and they say, I need all the frets replaced on this instrument. I'll look at it and I go, okay, I can replace the frets. Are you sure you want them all replaced, or would you rather have me just file them and recrown them? I said, there's nothing wrong with doing that on this. I can make it perfectly playable by filing and recrowning. Now, I realize it's just the fact that they don't understand. I understand that. I'm not picking on anybody. I'm just trying to explain, if you're going to be a luthier, here's the things that's going to happen, and you, as a luthier, as a professional doctor, if you will, should try to put the person on the right path. And that's what I try to do. I try to steer them in the right path. Almost always you can file frets and recrown frets at least twice, and most always you can do it 3 times, and I would even say more some cases. It depends how far worn the frets are. Now, the optical illusion on the frets is that when you wear those frets down, there's kind of a mirror effect, and it looks like the fret's a lot deeper than it is. Most of the time, the fret groove is not that terribly deep. Now, there's obvious exceptions, and sometimes you do need to replace the frets. And then on the other hand, sometimes the fret wears just on 1 or 2 frets. And you'd be way ahead in those cases to just put 2 new frets in, file them level with the rest of the frets, and move on, in those cases. Because what you don't understand is when you replace all your frets, and especially on certain fretboards, and those certain fretboards are really good quality hardwoods like ebony and rosewood, which you think, well, why would those be a problem? Those are the most common and the best ones, but they're very, very hard. And when you pull the frets out, they have a tang on those frets that lifts the end grain of that wood, and that causes chipping on every fret. And, some are much worse than others. It depends on the piece of wood. And you don't know, as a luthier, you don't know till you pull that fret out. So, you might get away with almost no chipping at all on one fretboard, and then the next one is just chipped, like crazy. And you just don't know till you start pulling them. So what I do to minimize that, of course, is I wet them down, and I try to make sure that I get the water under the fret. I try to work the water in under the fret. That softens that end grain a lot, and so when you're pulling that fret out, and if you use the proper fret pulling tool to keep the wood pushed down as you're lifting the fret, then you'll minimize your tear out. But my point of the whole thing is that it's a common request. I need all my frets replaced. I need a complete fret job, And when in fact, 9 out of 10 times, I would say, you don't need that. In fact, you just need a good leveling and recrowning. And the other last point on that is that people don't realize that after you replace all your frets, put all new frets in, what is the first thing you should do if you're a qualified luthier? You should level all the frets and recrown them all. So you're still going to do that anyway. You know what I mean? You're still going to level them and recrown them, because I don't care how good you think you are, you'll never drive them in at the same height. Never. And I said never, meaning never. It just doesn't happen. You may think it does, but it doesn't. As a machinist, I know how to deal in thousandths of inches. Don't get me wrong, I'm not a professional machinist, but I am a machinist of sorts. And I know that a thousandth of an inch here or there, first of all, can make a difference whether your instrument buzzes or not. And you want them as level as you can get them, especially relative to each other. In other words, this fret at this end and this fret at this end don't have to be the exact same height, but all the frets in that area and all the frets in this area for sure need to be the same height. Otherwise, you press the string down in this area back here, and if the frets behind it are higher, they're going to buzz. It's just that simple. So my point is, on fret jobs, it's just a common request as a luthier for everybody to come in and think they know what they need and explain that they need a heart transplant when really all they need is an aspirin, and that's the point. So So understand that as a luthier, that you should try to put the customer on the right path. If they insist, you do what the customer wants, because that's your number one job, is customer service. So if I still have somebody say, no, I don't care, I still want them replaced, I'll go, okay, fine, I'll do that. I'm not saying I won't do it. I'm just saying that you should try to correct them and put them on the right path. Don't immediately change out their heart, Okay, enough on that one, but I hope you picked up some good points there and some tips about fret jobs. The next very common request, I need a neck reset. I need for you to, take the neck out and put it back in and put it at the proper angle. Well, I'm not saying it's quite as common as the fret thing in terms of whether or not you can save it without a neck reset, but you should analyze a lot of things before you just jump into a neck reset, because honestly, there's lots of shops that will just jump into a neck reset. And I know a bunch of them, and it's just not necessary in a lot of cases. The first thing you should do when a customer brings you a guitar or anything that says, I need a neck reset, you should be looking down this here and seeing how the neck is. Is the neck like this, or is the neck like this, or is the neck flat, or what? And you should be able to know by just looking at it, is this salvageable or not? And I can, within 30 seconds, I can go, yeah, you're right, we're going to need a neck reset on this. Or, no, I think there's something else wrong. We need to check and see what else is going on here. I know you got high action, but there could be easily something else wrong. There could be a huge bulge right here, in the body. There could be other issues. There could be loose braces. The bridge plate could be bad, And that HD 28 that I fixed for Leon recently was a good example of a whole bunch of other issues, but his still needed a neck reset. And I'm not above doing a neck reset. I've had comments like, why do you refuse to do neck resets? I don't ever refuse to do a neck reset. It's just that, again, like a good doctor, I don't just give them a heart transplant when they walk in and say, Doc, I need a heart transplant. I want to see what's really wrong first, and then I'll do what's really necessary. And that's the same way on neck resets. You really, as a luthier, should be looking that over with a critical eye, and you should be checking out everything and making sure you need a neck reset. Because a neck reset, again, is, you're breaking the instrument yet again. And the thing about neck resets is, especially if it's a high-quality, high-end instrument, you got to take the fretboard off a lot of times. Not always. Sometimes you can get by with just taking that one fret out, drilling holes, putting moisture down in there, and the neck will come out. You're lucky when that happens. But once you start, you're pretty much committed. And you might end up taking the whole fretboard off because you don't know what you don't know till you know it, And so my point is the neck reset should be your last resort. In other words, if there's something else wrong, fix whatever else is wrong. And then if you still need a neck reset, give it a neck reset. Okay, so that's the second most requested thing that comes in the shop. And then the third thing, now this is much more esoteric, miscellaneous, whatever you want to call it. And that is, I want to add X, Y, Z to my guitar. Or I want you to make this modification. Well, that one's pretty open. Sometimes, it's no problem. You can just do it. But, there's a lot of times, again, as a professional luthier, you ought to have the guts to stand up and say, no, I don't think we should do this to your instrument, Case in point, there's a local fella here in this area. He doesn't watch my videos at all. In fact, I doubt he even knows how to turn a computer on. That does stuff like that all the time. And he brought me his really nice D35 Martin, an old one to boot, and he wanted me to put one of those pick guards that goes all the way around the sound hole and just cover it all up. Basically cover the whole top of the pick guard. And I'm not exaggerating. It was pretty much covering the whole top of the pick guard. I said, "But I'm not going to do that." And he says, well, why not? I'm going to pay you. I said, I'm not going to do that. Sorry. That's just going to ruin your guitar. It's not going to help your sound. It's going to look like crap to begin with. And I said, why would you want to do that? Oh, I saw Buck Owens. He had one like that, whatever it is. It's sorry. You're going to have to take it to somebody else. This boy ain't doing it. Too bad, so sad. I'll see you later. I'm not going to ruin the value of an instrument just because you want me to. And so that's what I'm saying. You need to stand up and have enough scruples to not take their money, and you just need to say what's right and what's not right. And here's another one, and this one happened too, and this one actually kind of made me mad, really, but I didn't get mad at the customer, but it kind of made me angry, I'll be honest, and that is, I had a customer, he had I'm trying to remember what kind of mandolin it was. I believe it was just a no-name handmade mandolin. I think it was. And it looked pretty much like a Gibson type, mandolin. And he wanted me to put a veneer on the headstock and put the Gibson and put the Gibson's logo in it. I said, sorry, I ain't doing it. He says, I'll pay you $1,000. Now keep in mind, this was back in the probably late 80s or early 90s. $1,000 was a lot of money. And I said, no, ain't going to do it. And I didn't do it. There is no way I'm going to fake an instrument to be something else, period. End of discussion. It ain't going to happen, just so there you go. So that's my point. Modifications would probably be the third most common thing that people come in and ask for that either I just won't do or I'll put them on a slightly different path. If they're modification, like they want to add a pickup or something, I might recommend a better pickup or a different pickup or a less invasive pickup or something like that, which I think is the right path also. You try to put them on the path of least destruction and best for them and their instrument. So it's just like being a doctor in a whole lot of ways. So don't come in asking for a heart transplant. I hope that little discussion makes sense to you guys, and especially those of you, and I hear from lots of you who are saying, I'm really wanting to get into repairing instruments. And if you are, I hope you take those few comments right there to heart and try to do the right thing rather than just the money thing. Just to get off on a slightly different tangent, Tim Morrison was here from Salt Lake City, Utah. You saw that in a vlog earlier this week. And, we were at dinner at Emo's Pizza, and we were telling stories back and forth, and he was telling the story, and I've said this many times before, so it's not new to me, but he was telling the story. He had his violin, and it had a crack in it, and he took it to one of the reputable violin shops. $5,000 to fix this crack. $5,000. Now, the crack, the way he described it to me, I could have fixed it in 30 minutes maximum, put cleats in it if I needed, whatever, 30 minutes, and I would have charged him, probably $50 to $100. Let's just say $100. $5,000 to fix it. And he goes, and you know what? The violin was only worth $1,200. They even told me that it's only worth $1,200. But they still said it would be $5,000 to fix it. Okay, that's my point about the Good Old Boys Club. They've got a racket going on, and they're ripping people off left and right. Chocolate, as bad as that thing was crushed and busted up, I think I charged them $1,800 because it took me 18 hours to fix it, and I charge $100 an hour. If you had taken that, I'm not exaggerating now, I promise you, I'm telling this truth as I know it. I may be wrong, but I'm telling you the truth as I know it. And that is, if you had taken chocolate to one of those reputable violin shops, 25,000 minimum, probably more like 50,000. And it was a $30,000 violin. Yeah, right. There you go. So that's my point. As a luthier, in my opinion, have some scruples if you're going to be a luthier and do the right thing. If you do the right thing that way, you will have to do like me, and you'll have to shut your business down to get some rest. I'm still turning away people, just constantly. So, just do the right thing. That's all I can tell you. Okay, from last week's Shop Talk, we had several questions, and I want to get into those real quick. Someone said they wanted to see me do a guitar case build video. Well, I probably won't do that, to be honest with you. Now, I did build a number of cases over the years. In fact, watch this for a second, and I'll show you a case that I build.
Tea and soda pop written on the faded window sign. Ruby and Pearl are her best friends. There you'll find the three of them. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 9:30. You can set a watch by their routine. Classic small town Norman Rockwell scene.
Well, that was almost ugly, and you couldn't see it, but it was still almost real ugly. I just ruined my stepladder going up to the shelf to get this down. Trust me, it's going to the dumpster. Oh man, I almost fell. Anyway, this is like a case that I used to build. It's what you call a road case. And I used to build a lot of these. In fact, I used to build a whole bunch of them. Now, this is a double mandolin case. It's not fancy at all on the inside. It's just foam filled, that kind of thing like that. Very protected. This wooden block here makes it crush proof. You can step on it, that kind of thing. So anyway, I used to build these. I built them for several renowned musicians. You know me in names. Mike Aldridge, the dobro player, he was with Seldom Seen. I built him a case for his lap steel guitar, I think it was. There was another fiddle player. I should know his name. I think I built him two cases, and the last case I built him, he called me, he says, I'm going on the Johnny Carson show with, I think it was with Tony Rice, I can't remember now. But anyway, he was going on the Johnny Carson show. Maybe it was Ricky Skaggs, I don't remember. But anyway, he wanted a special flight case for his fiddle, and so I built him a case in a rush and sent it to him. But I don't build cases anymore. I quit doing it, mainly because it was just a major hassle getting the parts. The parts were so crazy expensive. I don't even have an idea what the parts would cost now, but back in the 80s, 90s, each one of those cases would cost me a couple $100 to build, just the parts, So anyway. I quit doing that. I just got tired of messing with it. So I probably won't be building a guitar case or doing that type of video. Matter of fact, Tony Rice asked me to build him or was it Wyatt? I think it was Wyatt. Asked me to build a flight case like that for his guitar. And golly, you won't believe how heavy that case is. I mean, it's really heavy. And to build one for a guitar, oh man, it just wouldn't even be practical, I don't think. I mean, I know people do it, but it wasn't in my line of thinking, so I just didn't do it. Someone asked in the last video, why do I slot the pins, or why do I use slotted pins versus slotting the hole in the bridge? Well, I got to be honest and say that I do a little bit of both sometimes. It really depends on the circumstances. Most of the time, I would much prefer to slot the pins because, if something goes wrong, you've only got a pin to replace. Where, if you cause any weakness in your bridge or cause a problem with your bridge, then you got a much bigger problem, And so I typically don't slot the bridges, but I will under certain circumstances. If I just can't get a fit to be right or something like that, well, then I will actually slot the bridge a little bit also. And I actually have a special made saw for that. I don't know whether I can find it or not because I haven't used it in quite a long time. That might be a different issue. Let's see. This isn't the actual one that I use, but it's very, very similar. Yeah, I don't see it right there. It's probably in one of these other boxes. This is similar. It's not the one I actually use. But you can see there it's a very small saw, and you can use this to slot much better than you can a file. A file takes forever, especially in a hard wood. Where this, if you just rub it like a file, and I'm not sawing, I'm not trying to do this. I'm just using it like a file, like a rasp. And it'll cut the slot much faster for you if you need to use something like that to do that. But as a general rule, I don't slot the bridges very much, but I will do it occasionally. The next question from last week was, what camera equipment do I use? And my camera equipment is pretty minimal. It really is. It's very minimal. This is a Canon EOS T7i. It's a EOS Rebel T7i. I don't use any microphones at all. Now today, on these live ones, I'm using this blue Yeti type microphone on this live broadcast. But on all of my videos, all of them, this is what I use, with the exception of my smartphone occasionally. Like that little video clip this morning was just my smartphone. But again, no external microphones at all. Now, I'm not saying that's the greatest setup for outdoor shooting. It isn't. But for the indoor shooting that I do 99% of the time, it seems to work pretty well. I'm amazed how good these microphones pick up in these cameras. And all the live, whenever we're playing live, it's all just picked up with just the built-in microphone on these T7Is. I think they're just incredibly good sound for what they are, Could it be better? Sure, it could be better. But that's all I use. And then they went on and asked about the software also for my videos. Now, again, I'm pretty minimal on this. You can do a whole lot more. But I just use Video Studio. It's one of the cheaper video packages. I was put onto that by my buddy at Elderly Iron, Jeff Bradshaw. He, this old truck on YouTube, he's got several handles he goes by. Redneck Restorations is another one. And anyway, he's sent me the first copy of it free. He gave it to me, Video Studio. And from then on, I've upgraded. It's got its bugs. I'll be honest with you. There's a couple of bugs that just drive me crazy in Video Studio. But overall, it's an easy package to learn, as video packages are. Like there's a free one that does way more stuff. DaVinci Resolve. I mean, it's like a Hollywood type video package, and it's free. DaVinci Resolve, but it comes with a learning curve. Whew, man! And if you're really into computers and software, you can learn it. But it's tough to use that one. It really is. Even Video Studio, to be truthful, I probably use about 10% of its capability. And that's the truth of it. So Video Studio is probably far easier to use, and it's more affordable. Even though it's not free, Vinci Resolve is free, but you got a learning curve with it, and I mean a huge learning curve, so you'll pay for it a different way. Okay, so that's pretty much it. The next question was, why don't people use oak for instruments? Well, yeah, it's hard to explain that exactly unless you're really into wood and understand wood really well. But oak is a very, very strong wood. It's good for a lot of things, but it has very minimal resonance. You can tap on oak and it's kind of like stepping on a plum. There's just not much there. It just, kind of like nothing. You tap on a piece of badook the same size and it goes tong. Probably enough said right there. I mean, it's just, it doesn't make a tone when you tap on oak for the most part. I mean, there are occasions where you can get a little bit of a sound out of a piece of oak. The next thing is oak's really heavy. Is it heavier than Padauk? Probably not. It's probably not as heavy, but it's really heavy, and you get very little for the weight, so it's just not a good choice for instruments. Very good for a lot of things, but just not so much for instruments. How to fill fingerboard divots was the last one from last week that I saw that I didn't get to. Excuse me. Well, now you're talking about a problem. This is much more difficult, honestly. Filling fingerboard divots is very difficult to do and do it well. In fact, I'm not even sure it's possible. Probably the easiest way to fill them is just to use a clear CA glue or something like that, something that's clear, because you'll actually see the darkness through the clarity, and it almost blends better that way than any other way. Now, typically, if you hold the instrument at an angle, you'll see the fill. But if you're looking straight at it, you typically don't see it very much compared to some other fill choices. Another fill choice would be just to use a regular wood filler and then dye it to match. But my option of choice when I can get away with it, and most of the time I can get away with it, is just taking a single edge razor blade like you've seen me do and clean the fretboard up with that scraping action. And, if it's a low fingernail groove, you can typically get them out with this. And that's my preference if I can get away with that. But sometimes they're so deep you just can't get away with that. But then again, it's not a bad idea to level it as low as you can get it first, then fill what's left, which often is much smaller. So that's probably still good advice, is to scrape it down and shrink the size of the void, because you'll be surprised, you'll shrink it a lot when you scrape it like that. And especially for small divots, I do recommend a clear CA glue. I think that's probably your best way to go. And then if you do a little light sanding there, it kind of blends it in pretty good, really. The other option would be you could take your sawdust and really fine ebony dust, if you're using an ebony fretboard, mix it with your CA glue and fill it that way, and then sand it off. And it looks pretty good, but typically, anytime you fill something like that, typically that spot will be a slightly different shade or slightly different color, and often it's lighter, and so it's kind of stands out. You typically see it. So it's not an easy thing to do. Put it in comments if you have a better way. That's just what I do. And like I said, most of the time I get rid of it by scraping it if I can. Okay, that's pretty much my show for today. I am going to go to questions now. We've got about 10 minutes left, so let me scroll up here. We have 156 viewers at the moment, and when I scrolled up, it went instantly back. Let me scroll up again. I just did that. Now let me see if I see question marks. Scott Roberts looks like the first one I see. Why are you fixing that piece of junk? I'll tell you why, because you can, period. Well, thank you. I do get that a lot, believe it or not. People say, why are you wasting your time on that? I'd throw that away. Well, you're not a sentimental person then, like my grandfather's fiddle, it's not a high-end fiddle, but I wouldn't take $1 million for it. If you came up and said, I'll give you $1 million, I'd say, well, sorry, I just can't sell it. It's just, for me, that's more important than the money. So there you go. The next one is Chill Howie. What is your opinion of devices like tone right that vibrate the instrument to change the tone? Well, I don't have a problem with it. I just kind of have my doubts if they really, really make much of a difference. I've heard it my whole life that setting them in front of a speaker or, something that vibrates is a good thing to do. I don't see how it really hurts anything, so I don't have a problem with it. But to be quite truthful, I don't chase after that kind of stuff. So I've never tested a tone right, so I really can't speak to it. It may be way better than I'm expecting, but I typically just don't know that much about that kind of thing, so I'll just leave it at that. Mike Power just made an editorial comment there that says, Jerry, it's pretty sad, but some people are really stupid. Keep up the awesome videos. Well, I'll just leave it at that. I won't make a comment on that. Do I disagree? I didn't say I disagreed. Scott Roberts, again, says, Jerry, I highly respect your integrity for not taking on a job that would be right as in trying to make handmade mandolin into a Gibson. It says a lot about your character. Well, you're either honest or you're not. Am I 100% honest? No, I can't honestly say that. Am I honest when it counts? Yeah, I think I am. I really do. Would I ever cheat on my taxes? Compared to what most people do, I would say no, I don't cheat on my taxes. Compared to what, do I fudge here or fudge there a little bit? Yeah, probably. But the government just wastes it anyway. They just do. Gee whiz, it's pitiful. It's really pitiful. Politics and me are like oil and water. We don't mix at all. At all. Yeah, you wouldn't want me to talk to your best friend's politician, I'm telling you right now. How much height do you gain replacing frets if they were completely worn out? Well, completely worn out is that's your factor. What does that mean? Typically, completely worn out means that there's grooves in those few places where the strings are. So it's kind of, it depends on how bad that is. But often, like in my example where you're replacing just 2 frets, typically those are the bad frets. Well, the rest of them aren't that worn. You know what I'm saying? So you replace the ones that are super worn, you file them down even with the rest of them, and you might only have to file a few thousandths off of them to get them even with the rest of them. So to me, that's my point. I hope that's what you're trying to understand there. And, so I can't give you an exact number how much you're going to file, but typically you're not going to file that much off of a new fret compared to your old frets unless they're all really worn. You know what I'm saying? And then in that case, you don't want to just replace 1 or 2. If they're all really worn, you want to replace them all. And that's the sad thing, is that typically they're not that terribly worn. And I have on a lot of occasions said, look, you got 5 frets here that are really worn badly. The rest of them look like they've never been used. You sure you want me to replace them all? I could just replace these 5, do a fret job, and you'll never know the difference, you know? And oftentimes they say, yeah, do that. Yeah, do that. How much height do you... Oh, I'm sorry. That's the same one. I apologize in advance. Asks, who is the gentleman in the tuxedo playing one of your mandolins? That is Carmine D'Amico. He was the fellow that played the mandolin through the Godfather movies. And I did build him that custom 10-string mandolin. I've told this story many times, so I apologize, but there's always new people, so there's people that have never heard it. He loved that mandolin. I mean, like, love that mandolin isn't even a good word. I'm seriously telling you, he loved that mandolin. And every single week, and I am not exaggerating, every single week for like 2 years, he called me and told me how much he loved it and who he was playing with in the studio. Yeah, I'm in the studio with Barbra Streisand. I'm in the studio with, whoever. I mean, it was famous people, I'm in the studio this week with, Frank Sinatra, and I'm playing your mandolin, or whatever. It was just like that all the time. So he loved it. And it was a 10-string mandolin, and they don't make, at least not to my knowledge, they don't make 10-string mandolin tuners. So what I did was I bought 2 sets of tuners, and I can't remember which brand they were, but I bought 2 sets, cut 3 off the bottom and 2 off the top, or vice versa, I don't remember, and then put them back together, And so there was a fine line cut but I made that fine line so good that when you put it together, you could barely even tell it was cut apart, And so that's how I made the 10 tuners. Of course, the neck had to be a little bit wider, and, it wasn't a lot wider, but I did make it a little bit wider. And it was the first one of those I'd ever made, so it was all just by guess and by gosh, And then the final, the final 2 tales on that mandolin were that he loaned it to the National Guitar Museum in New York City. They put it on display, and this was after I moved down here to the farm. Carmine didn't know my new number and all that stuff, and so he couldn't call me anymore. And quite honestly, I mean, I kind of feel bad about that. On the other hand, it was like kind of a relief, because I'm not much to talk on the phone anyway. And anyway, the phone rang one day, and he says, are you Jerry Rosa? And I said, yes. And the guy says, well, you don't know me, but Carmine D'Amico has graciously loaned your mandolin to us. I am the curator for the National Guitar Museum in New York City. And your guitar is now the centerpiece in our museum, and it's in a crystal case, and there are lights on it 360 degrees. And I have to tell you, I have never seen such a beautiful instrument in my whole life. And he said something like that, that kind of thing. And I said, well, thank you very much. It's nice to know that. And anyway, then the last story on that is that after Carmine died, by the way, Carmine won something like 24 Grammys or something, for playing and things. And he was, or a part of a team that won the Grammy or whatever. But anyway, he ended up with like 24 Grammys under his name, something like that. It may have been more, may have been less. But anyway, after he died, my phone started ringing again. And this was different, though. It was people, going, I some of that Carmine D'Amico mandolin, and I was just wondering what you would charge me to make one just like it. And I said, well, I don't know, now, I mean, this was in the 90s now, or late 90s, or maybe it was even in the early 2000s. I can't remember. And I think it was the early 2000s. And I said, well, I'd probably have to have at least $10,000 for one like that now, that thing was complicated, and plus it had all the abalone shell all the way around the body. I mean, it really was a high-end mandolin. So And I didn't just get one call like that. I got like 3 or 4. And what is up with this? All of a sudden, out of the blue, this starts happening, see? Well, then his son called me, and his son explained what had happened. His estate was being contested, I guess you'd say, in the courts, and these were lawyers calling me to find out, or probably wasn't the lawyer themselves. You know how that is. It was probably one of their flunkies calling me to find out what the value of that instrument was for their court case. And anyway, there you go. So that's the final thing I knew about it. I don't know any more about it than that. Someone did send me a link to it, though, and it had quite a write-up on it. I don't remember. But I will tell you for sure, he loved that mandolin. He just loved it. Rooster Run Workshop, what camera are you using today? Well, right today, this is just a little cheapy, it's one of the, what's the right word? Streaming cameras. It's a streaming camera. It's a Logi, and I'm looking, it's tiny little letters. HD 1080p Logi, Logi. That's all I got on that. I think this one actually has an extra letter on it somewhere. I think there's a C or something like that on this one. There's a couple of versions of this one. This one is the more upgraded version. I have the original one up at the house in case we ever do live streaming up at the house. But anyway, they're not an expensive camera. I think it's under $100. I think they're like $50, $60, something like that. Okay, the next question. I have a 1967 Martin D28. What bridge pins would you recommend? Well, Jeff, I'm not big on the bridge pins making much difference in the sound. I know a lot of people swear by that. I personally don't hear much difference. So for me, I get the bridge pins that I think look the best. And that's just the way I base it. So if you find some Martin bridge pins or some inlaid bridge pins and you like them, I'd go for it, I know a lot of people just swear up and down that the bridge pins make a huge difference in the sound. I don't feel they make much difference. I do think they make a little tiny bit probably, but it's almost so minimal that I don't really think it's noticeable. Now, if you went to an all steel bridge pin or, all brass bridge pins, you might hear some difference there. But in terms of plastic versus bone versus wood, I don't think you're going to hear very much difference. Bill Hyder just gave me a super chat, $20. Thank you so much, Bill. Thank you very, very much. I really do appreciate it. Bill O'Reilly. We've talked about that name before. FBI on the way? ? Could be. Could be. I have a gun, though. And I'll bet you that I'm a better shot than most of the guys that would come through the door. So there you go. That's not a brag. That's just a black and white fact again, because I was, a competitive archer. And if you can hit a bullseye this big at 100 yards and hit it consistently with a bow, how do you think you can shoot a gun? I'll just leave it at that. I don't miss much when I'm shooting a gun, even with a pistol. If I can digress, again, it is a bit of bragging, but it's more funny. I hope you think this is just a funny story, because it's a true story. I swear to you, it's 100% true. I was at the conceal carry class. I went there to get the permit or whatever. I never did go actually get the permit, but you had to go through this class to get the permit to do a conceal carry. I never did actually follow through on it. I just went to the class. But anyway, I was at the class, and before the class, there was probably 30 minutes there. We were waiting on I think he was late or something, and we were waiting on the instructor, and these guys were, kind of like in their little huddle, their semicircle, and I was sitting right next to them, and they're bragging about how good they can shoot a pistol. They can do this, and they can do that, and they can hit this at that distance, and so and so and so forth. And the one guy turns to me and says, how about you? How are you with a pistol? And I said, well, I'm really not very good with a pistol. I said, no, with a rifle, I pretty much can hit exactly what I'm aiming at. But with a pistol, not so much. I promise you, as God is my witness, I am not making any of this up. So we get to the range, because you have a couple of days of discussion or something, or a couple hours of discussion, then you actually go to the range and you have to shoot. And the instructor has to see you shoot, that kind of thing. So we get there. I get to the range, and I swear to you, I'm going pow, 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 pow. I'm shooting almost this fast. And I'm not kidding. I'm just going pow, 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 like that. We're only shooting from here to my door, which I'm going to say is 18 feet, something like that. I mean, it's like that distance. It's not very far. Maybe it was 5 yards, 15 feet, something like that. I don't know. It wasn't very far. So I had a hole, and I'm not making this up. It was 100 shots. I had a hole about that size in my target. All 100 shots in that hole. And I'm shooting that fast. I sit down on the bench, and I wait, and I'm not kidding you, I waited like 15 minutes for the other ones to finish shooting. And I'm not kidding. I sat there for 15 minutes while the rest of them finished shooting their 100 shots. None of them had a hole in their target. I mean, every one of them, like it was a body target, and there was bullets everywhere. Just bullets everywhere. There was no pattern. And they look over at my target and they went, "Oh my gosh, you said you couldn't shoot a pistol." And I just said, "Well, I can't really shoot a pistol very good, but I can really shoot a rifle." The instructor was impressed too. I promise you that's 100% true. I actually kept the target for proof. I've got the target somewhere. If I can find it, I'll show you someday. Gordon Bartlett. When filling fingernail divots, use the scrapings from the blade work to fill with the CA glue. It will be a perfect color match. Yeah, probably, but like I said, the problem is whenever you mix the CA glue with something else, it typically takes on a little different characteristic that you don't expect. It almost always does. You'll be right. You're right. It will be close, but the way the light hits it and stuff, it'll always be a little different color. Almost always. I mean, like I'll take ebony dust, which is really fine, and that's probably your better match because the scrapings are going to be more like curls, and that's probably not going to be that great of a match, honestly. Your dust is probably a better match. But, I haven't really tried the scrapings, to be honest with you. And the problem with the scrapings is they're more like curled up and little things, and it'd be hard to get it in the hole and keep it down in the hole, Larry Baziw, B-A-Z-I-W, I'm not sure how I would pronounce that. Hi, Jerry. Did you make your fret leveler? Have you have a video on how to make one? Well, I've talked about it many, many times, actually. And it really wouldn't deserve its whole own video, but here it is again. Before I put this wooden block on there, I didn't even get the idea of the wooden block, I'll be honest, until I saw Randy Schardiger using one, I think, from StuMac that had the wooden block on it. And anyway, I always just used the file itself and just held it between my fingers, and it worked fine for 20 years or so. But for the last 10 years, I've had this wooden block. And what it is, you use a bastard mill file. That's the title of it. This one's Nicholson, made in the USA. And by the way, there is a difference in the quality. I would get a Nicholson made in USA if you can find it. That's the problem. Nowadays, everything's offshores. But made in USA is a very good file, typically. And it's just a fine, cut bastard mill file. And this is a 6-inch one. Now, there's 2 or 3 things that people just don't know about files. First of all, everybody thinks a file is perfectly flat, and almost none of them are perfectly flat. Almost all of them, can't even give you a good example, almost all of them have a curve to them. And it's so minimal that 9 out of 10 people probably looking down it can't see it, but it's there. And you need to look at that and see where that curve is, and you want to put the curve down like that. In other words, you want the convex side or the concave side up, the cave, and you want the vex side down, the round side down, the hollow side up. And if you don't do it that way, don't put it on, because keep in mind, we're talking thousands of inches. If you don't put it on your block that way, you're going to be sorry. It ain't going to work real well, and you're not going to be happy. It needs to be that way. Even though you're only talking a couple thousandths inch bow, that matters. It really does. And then you want to round off this end here, and you can just take it over to a grinder and just round that end off. And the same way back here, you want to round this end off. And you could potentially cut it off really even right there at the teeth, I guess I'm looking for the word. You could potentially cut the file off right there, but I don't do that. I just cut the tang off and then just grind this part down a little bit. And anyway, and then when you use this file, by the way, the wooden block I made it out of maple, and I glued it on there, I think with JB Weld. Someone corrected me because I didn't know what I glued it on there with. But apparently I glued it on with JB Weld. And I got to be honest with you, that's the only time JB Weld in my whole life has ever held anything for me. I'm not kidding. That's not an exaggeration. I've used JB Weld 100 times, I'm sure. And I would say 99 times out of 100, it has failed. I'm not good with JB Weld. I know lots of people love it. They just swear by it. I can't get it to hold anything for me. But it held this apparently, if that's what I really used. Anyway, because I did this so long, I can't remember. But anyway, so that's how you do it. And it's just a maple block, and the shape is just to fit you. So, make it the shape that feels good in your hand. That's all. And then when you use it, less is more. You don't grind down and push. You just let it go lightly, and you'll actually feel it, and you'll see it shine up the high frets, and you'll feel it drag over those high frets. You can, if you put a light touch to it and you get used to feeling it, you'll know exactly which frets are high just by pushing this. You don't need one of those fret rockers and all that fancy junk. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's nothing wrong with using a fret rocker and all that. There's nothing wrong with it, but you don't need it because this will be your fret rocker. So anyway, that's all I do. It's just real simple. I keep everything simple. Common sense will take you a heck of a long way if you just let it happen. Okay. The next question I see is from Gregory Hafen, and he says, what brand of electronic tuner would you recommend? Well, I don't have a ton of experience with a lot of different electronic tuners. Well, that's not exactly true. I probably use as many as anybody has. But in terms of the bench ones, I thought maybe you were talking about the bench one. If you're talking about the bench one, the only bench one I've really used is this Korg orchestral tuner. It's OT 120. So on the bench, I like a tuner like this. First of all, I like that analog readout with the needle. It's really sensitive, and it's marked in cents, so I can see exactly how far it's off. Versus like the snark that clips on. Now I use snarks. I think they're great. I use a Peterson clip-on that I believe one of you guys sent me. I'll be honest, I can't remember where I got it, and I'm pretty sure it was from one of you viewers, and thank you for that, but I'm sorry, I can't keep track of names, you know me. But it's a wonderful tuner, and I use that too. It's a Peterson strobe tuner that clips on. So that's a really good one, but that costs a lot more money. to be quite honest with you, almost all of them work really well. There will be a lot of people that will argue with you on that and say that they lie, they're different. Well, at one time I used to really sell a lot of accessories, a lot of strings, and I had 6 or 7, maybe more tuners one day. And so just as a test for my own sanity, I really ran them all through the same instrument, through the same tuning, and I swear to you, I couldn't tell that much difference in any of them. So I think they're all pretty darn good. Now, that was 20 years ago. I don't know how much they've improved now, so it could be that there is some differences now. But I do know the Peterson strobe tuner is very good. So, I really don't have an exact brand to recommend. I just don't think you're going to go wrong. I would base it more on price and features and maybe friends' recommendations and things like that. Have I been hunting yet? We're about done here. By the way, we're over time, by the way. But have I been hunting hogs yet? And no, not yet, but their time is limited. Yeah. I've made, it's talking about shooting. I shot one hog with my 243 at 440 yards. So I can hit what I'm aiming at. That's not much of an issue. I love the movie Sergeant York, where he's shooting so far and everybody's amazed how good he can shoot. And, I don't mean to say I'm comparable to him. I'm sure he'd probably outshoot me. But on the other hand, that's the kind of shooting I can do. I really have, because of the intense training that I had with the archery, you learn how to aim and how to hold and how to not move on target. If you can do that with a bow at 100 yards, like I said, what do you think you can do with a rifle? It's just that much simpler. It's just much easier. Last question looks like Clarence Hatfield says, I have a sensitive nerve in my left index fretting finger because of taller frets. Would you recommend just file them down? I'm not sure I understand that question. I thought you were being funny at first, but I have a sensitive nerve in my left index fretting finger because of taller frets. Would you recommend just filing them down? Well, I am not a fan of tall frets. I've said that many times before. And the fact that the fret is tall, I know the really good musicians, their argument is they just touch the string to the fret and they have a light touch and they can do it much faster. That's their argument, and it's a good argument. I'm not disputing it. But for me personally, and because I don't play that well, I have a tendency to grip it too tight, and the tall frets make my fingers hurt. So I would either, like you said, you could potentially file them down, or you could potentially replace them with lower frets. That would probably be what I would do. That's going to have to be my answer for today. Thank you so much for being so kind to me. I appreciate it very much. I hope I cleared up the misunderstanding about my complaining on that video. I didn't really have anything against the lady or the person. I felt like I was just stating the obvious. And as far as doing the quality of the work on it, I put every bit of quality in it that I could put in it in the short amount of time that I could do it in, and I guarantee you that neck will never come apart again. The rest of it will probably fall apart, but the neck won't be a problem. We'll see you probably Monday will be the next time. There may be a video coming out tomorrow or sometime over the weekend. I'll have to see if Emery has another one ready for us yet or not. I don't know, but I hope she does. And if we do have one, I'll for sure turn it loose. Thank you again. We'll see you soon.